Good day there viewers, my name is Cliff and welcome to my channel called Vintage Time. In today's episode of How to Cut Gemstones, without a doubt we will be featuring the finest citrine on the planet. This particular citrine comes from Uruguay and it's called Santa Ana Madeira citrine, and it is the most highly coveted colour of all the citrines. It represents 2% of all the citrines on the planet that comes in this colour. The name comes from the fortified wine made in the Madeira Islands off the coast of Portugal. This particular Madeira citrine is of exceptional high quality and colour. It has no zoning or no flaws. Also, to buy this type of quality rough is extremely expensive. Although the rough material may be expensive, but the payoff is great because from a gem cutting point of view, you get to cut high quality gems that have long-term intrinsic value. So let's get started with faceting this wonderful citrine from Uruguay. I'll drop in an image of the type of design that I'll be cutting, which is a rectangular step cut. So this is the rough material I've selected to facet the rectangular step cut. Now the rectangular step cuts are not the easiest of the designs to facet due to the elongated facets, which are often normally difficult to polish. Anyway, before we start cutting I need to preform this gem. So what I'm doing here, I'm using a 240 grit diamond disc and I'm doing what we call a preform. And this is just grinding out the basic outline or the shape of the gem you wish to facet. So this is all done by hand. Use plenty of water drip when you're doing this because this will stop the stone from overheating and it just eliminates more scratches than you need. So I'm doing all this by eye. You can take your time when you do this, and by doing this you can take out any flaws or any veils that may be in the gem. Although this gem is perfect, I don't have to worry about that. All I have to do is just get the required shape. So the preform is now complete, and as you can see it's a nice little rectangular shape, and I'll take a close-up macro shot and you can see that the gem is in quite good condition. It's got a few little pits on the outside, but that shouldn't pose any issues because internally the gem is clean. Now that the preform is complete, the next step is to glue the gem to a brass stop stick. The dop stick is mounted in what we call transfer jig, and I use a 2-part epoxy glue called Devcon 5-minute glue, and I let that cure overnight so the stone is firmly attached to the dop stick. So the next step is to mount the gem into the quill of the faceting machine. My particular dop stick has a groove in it, and I line up the groove with this pin, and then I'll lock in the dop stick and it will be set perfectly in place. As a rule of thumb, when faceting rectangles you need to set the length and the width, and to do this you have to have the faceting arm set at 90 degrees and then you're set to grind away. In this piece of footage here you can see that the outline of the stone has been faceted. I'm about to start to facet what we call the pavilion facets. I have my protractor set at 63 degrees, my index wheel is set at index 64, and I'll be cutting the first 2 facets on the pavilion, which will be a 64 index and a 32 index. If you have a 96 index wheel, you'll simply be cutting 2 facets at 96 and 48 indexes. So I'm ready to facet the first 2 pavilion facets set at 63 degrees. I'm using a very worn 240 grit diamond disc. Then I'll move on to a worn 800 grit disc followed by a 3000 grit diamond pre-polished disc. This can vary with the type of discs you use, as your discs may be very new, so you need to choose the right disc accordingly. The first tier of the pavilion has now been cut at 63 degrees. I'll move on to cutting the second step of the pavilion facets at 53 degrees, but I'm going to downshift to an 800 grit disc. So now the second tier of the pavilion has been cut at 53 degrees. I downshifted from an 800 grit diamond plated disc and then finished it off with a 3000 grit diamond disc, which is the pre-polished disc. And the key to doing this right is getting all the facets to meet. Now the third tier of the pavilion has been faceted at 43 degrees, and I only used a 3000 grit diamond disc because the less material I need to cut, the less aggressive the disc needs to be. So because I'm using a 64 index wheel, the index numbers to cut these steps are 64, 32, 16 and 48. In this scene here, I've faceted all the corner facets using a 3000 grit disc. I'll zoom in so you get a good look at how all the facets meet. Unfortunately, I couldn't show you how I faceted the corner facets. If I did, I would have surely overcut. Now on to polishing the pavilion facets and the girdle facets. I'm using sewing machine oil, just a couple of drops. I'll lightly rub that in with tissue paper. Then I'll rub my finger lightly on the oiled tin lap and dip it into 50,000 diamond grit. And I'll use a fair bit because I want the first set of pavilion facets to polish, and I'll probably need a fair bit, but you can use as much or as little as you want, but I'll use a fair bit for the first set of pavilion facets, and then I'll start polishing. There is no easy way to learn how to polish a gemstone. It will take a lot of trial and effort and perseverance, but in essence you want the flat of the facet to perfectly align on the flat of the disc, and the diamond should actually float between the disc and the facet, and this is what polishes the actual facet surface. So even when you're polishing, you can still overcut a facet, so make sure you use your loupe under high magnification and just take your time. In the following scenes you'll see the entire pavilion being polished. In this scene I've polished a girdle outline and the first step of the pavilion facets. Because I'm not a commercial gem cutter and I'm cutting gemstones mainly for a hobby and an interest, it's really important that each gem I cut has perfect meet points, or as close to perfect as possible. As a side note, if you're a person who loves to buy gemstones, make sure you try to buy gems that have really good meet points. Don't be scared to walk into a jeweler and ask if you can borrow their loupe, and make sure that everything is looking good under magnification. To facet the crown, we need to transfer the gem onto another dop stick, and once again I'm using my transfer jig to do this. The original dop stick is removed by heat. I use a little mini blowtorch, but you can also heat a scalpel blade and cut the dop off. In many ways, faceting the crown is very similar to faceting the pavilion. What is difficult for many is getting a perfect girdle outline and choosing how thick you want your girdle to be. So the crown will have several tiers. In fact, there will be 3 tiers, and those angles for the tiers will be 55 degrees, 42 degrees and 26 degrees. Each step will be cut exactly the same like on the pavilion. You need to adjust the coarseness of the discs as you start to cut less material, and of course when you facet the table you'll be using a 45-degree adapter. Because we're cutting a rectangular shape, the index settings for the crown will be exactly the same as the index settings of the pavilion. If you're a beginner and new to faceting, I wouldn't choose this design to start with. I'd be more inclined to start with a standard round brilliant. Step cut rectangles or squares can be quite difficult to polish, and with this particular design, the last step on the crown is less than half the width of the girdle, so it's very detailed faceting, and some of those tiny intricate corner facets you could overcut within a heartbeat. To complete the rest of this crown, I'll be using just a 3000 grit diamond disc, and to polish the crown I'll be using the same method as on the pavilion. In this particular video I decided to use more narration just to change things up for my subscribers. On that note, it will be over and out with the narration. Please like and subscribe, leave some comments, and don't forget to see the final reveal. This is a really beautiful gem. So until next time everybody, take care and bye for now.